And at this time, we're going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 510, enacting the Kansas Vacant Property Act to prohibit municipalities from imposing any fees or registration requirements on unoccupied residential or commercial property. And we'll begin with Jason Long to explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 510 would enact the Kansas Vacant Property Act. This would prohibit municipalities from requiring the registration or listing of vacant property with a municipality or imposing any type of tax, fee, or other charge against the owner of that vacant property solely on the basis that the property is vacant. Any ordinance or resolution regulation that is in violation of the act would be deemed null and void under the law. I'll point out the definition of vacant property there on the bill in line 11 is any property that is unoccupied. That means if the property consists of a single unit, then it's just unoccupied. If the property consists of multiple units, then it's considered under that definition of one or more of those units are unoccupied. And this would apply to both residential and commercial property. 510 would go into effect on July 1st of this year if it's enacted. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jason? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I know the answer, but is there any time frame on this question of vacancy? So if it's unoccupied and it's unoccupied in the week that you're in between tenants, would that count?
Yes. So a city couldn't oppose any kind of registration or fee, regardless of whatever length of time a unit was unoccupied.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Long, does this speak to, beyond the time frame posed by Senator Francisco, does it speak to any exemptions as to, and I'm reading it, it's just one page, but there's no exemption. I mean, there's no reason. Renovation. Is there any exemption? Is there any waiver? Or is there anything in here that speaks to why this wouldn't be imposed for any moment of time at all? A waiver for it, like renovation?
No, it seems to be just an absolute prohibition on any charges, fees, taxes, registration requirements for property solely on the basis that the property is unoccupied, that one or more units of the property are unoccupied.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Jason, my question's on would be line 16 through line 19. Explain the difference, please, between that section and line 31 to line 34.
Dennis, is mic on?
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm being too long. All right. Sorry about that. I apologize. Can you explain the difference between, it would be section C, line 16, and section F, line 31?
Sure. Subsection C is the peanut of the bill, prohibiting municipality from imposing regulation on property solely on the basis that the property is vacant. Line 31 is the carve-out that it isn't to be construed as prohibiting any other regulations concerning vacant property that are applicable to all property. So, for instance, if you have zoning regulations that are applicable to all residential property, that would apply still even if the property is vacant. But if you require property to be specifically listed or registered with the city because it is vacant, that would be prohibited.
All right, other questions for Jason? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, would this apply to, and I'm just trying to imagine situations, say a property was overrun, it was vacant, they couldn't impose some kind of resolution to clean it up or mow, or I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Please clarify.
I don't know that, but I would have to look at whether or not it would have any impact on abandoned property nuisance statutes. That's a good question as to whether or not this would preclude any action by a city based on that purpose. Maybe because those are based on abandoned or nuisances being present, and this is predicated solely on it being unoccupied. There's a distinction there, but we can certainly look into it.
I think it'd fall under that reason.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason.
Any other questions for Jason? All right, thank you, Jason. At this time, we'll turn our attention to our conferees, proponent conferees, and what I would like to do is please limit your remarks to 4 minutes. Please don't read your testimony. Tell us what we need to know about this bill. And the reason I want to limit you to 4 minutes is so we can ask questions. So first up, we have the oral proponents, and it's Ed Jaskinski. I'm sorry. You can always correct me on that. The Associated Landlords of Kansas. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Ed is a lot easier.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't, when my grandfather died, in 1983, my dad had a hard time selling the property. It was a family home and whatever. That house sat vacant for 2.5 years until we were finally able to get him to it. Under the current laws in Kansas City, he would have had to register it as a vacant property, keep the utilities on, or maybe not keep the utilities on, pay a $200 fee. It just seems unfair. There's a lot of reasons why properties become vacant. My bill does not take away the rights of the city to enforce code enforcement. Lines 31 through 34 is very explicit in that. And in fact, we negotiated with the city of Wichita this last week and asked for some additional language in it, which is a friendly amendment, which I have agreed to. I think it's redundant, but it just explains more what they're after, to explain that their rights to board up the property if it's vacant, whatever. The problem with registering properties is it becomes a public record, and vandals and ne'er-do-wells and whatever, once they find out a property is vacant in any manner, it becomes subject to copper stripping, vandalism, whatever. Sometimes cities post neon stickers on the property saying it's unfit or whatever because of that. It's just a neon sign saying, hey, let's go in and squat or whatever. When you get a squatter in a vacant piece of property, once they find out it's vacant, if the utilities are on, the police can't remove them. You have to go through an eviction process to do it. I've run into that situation several times. So that's one of the reasons why utilities are not left on in vacant properties. So there's a lot of reasons why having a registry is not a good deal. One of the questions that's always asked of me is any other state, done what we're trying to do here? Yes, Oklahoma City passed an ordinance in 2013 that was a vacant registry thing, and in 2014, the Oklahoma legislature took it away from them because of the reasons we're talking about here. We found that out through the Kansas Legislative Research newsletter from 2019. So there's a whole lot of reasons, and my testimony, I think, speaks for itself, and I'd be happy to stand for questions at this time.
Thank you, Ed. I think what we'll do is listen to all the proponents, and then we'll come back to questions. Okay. Thank you. Next, we have Kelly Von Zoll, the Kansas Bankers Association. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I'm Kelly Van Zoll with Kansas Bankers Association, and I'm here today to talk about the kind of unique situation of the lender in these ordinances. Our Kansas mortgage laws are actually lien statutes. So when you get a lien, when you get a mortgage, it's a lien. It's not a title. So we're not entitled to ownership when they go into default and foreclosure. We have to wait for the foreclosure period, then we have to wait for the statutory right of redemption time. This can last up to 2 years. During that time period, we're not really the owner in the sense that we cannot go onto the property. We couldn't even mow the lawn if we wanted to. Yet under these vacant property registries, we're being treated as the owner and we have to pay this fee annually, semi-annually, and that adds up very quickly. We understand the safety and soundness reasons behind a registry or the economic development reasons, and we want to be good community partners. We just think that these kind of extreme fees don't match up with what they're trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
Next we have, Kelly, sorry. God. I had Katie in my head. Martha New Smith, the Kansas Manufactured Housing Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Martha Smith. I'm with Kansas Manufactured Housing Association. Excuse me. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. The association does support Senate Bill 510. We do feel like it's an infringement on private property rights. There are a number of reasons why a property could be vacant. A tenant could move out without notifying the landlord. Renovation, repair, you may not be able to find a qualified tenant. You may not be able to find a qualified buyer. I know in today's market, trying to find a qualified buyer is probably not going to be an issue. But for those of you who were around in the 80s, when interest rates were 17 to 25% with adjustable rate mortgages, you could not find a buyer. So houses sat vacant. There's also the fact that a lot of times the homes are inherited and it's a decision that a family has to make. That could take quite a bit of time, plus the inheritance process itself. Not to mention the pandemic has put a whole new spin on the problem of rental and selling. So again, as Ed mentioned, we would be willing if the local governments do not feel like the lines 30 through 34 address their concerns about being able to collect costs for, say, boarding up a home or mowing or trimming. We would be willing to look at clarifying language for that. But again, we feel like this is a private property right, and just because a property is vacant does not mean that it violates any nuisance ordinances. So with that, I'd stand for questions when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Stephanie Mulholland, Heartland Credit Union Association.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm Stephanie Mulholland here on behalf of Heartland Credit Union Association. I'm just here to speak from the lender perspective as well, that we try to keep people in their homes as much as we can, but occasionally there are situations where someone opts to walk away from a mortgage or that we have to go through the foreclosure process. That process, as you've heard from prior conferees, can take 12, 18, 24 months. During that time, we're not legally allowed to sell the property because we don't technically own it. But we do have a vested interest in making sure the property is maintained and to restoring occupancy. So I think that lenders share that goal of local communities of preventing blight and protecting these neighborhoods. But these types of ordinances just add to the cost and the time involved with us trying to do that. So just wanted to express our support for that aspect and happy to take questions at the appropriate time.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Is there anyone else that showed up today that would like to speak as a proponent? Please come forward and state your name and who you're with.
All right. My name is Mark Toom. I'm with the Kansas Association of Realtors. You should have my testimony. It was emailed. If it isn't, I will make sure that it gets sent again. But we are involved in this issue primarily because we view this as a private property rights issue, has been stated. We feel that the circumstances here really should be something that's treated by nuisance. I think that the arguments that a vacant property is a precursor or something that might lead to blight really reinforces that currently cities do have a lot of tools to deal with nuisances, and that those should be really where their focus should be. And this tax essentially on vacant properties is unnecessary. So with that, there are a lot of reasons why people keep their properties vacant, and certainly my members would love the opportunity to sell those vacant properties, but we believe certainly in private property rights, and that is the chief issue here involved. So happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We'll find that testimony, make sure everybody gets it. Anyone else that would like to speak as a proponent? Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll open it up for a little bit of time here from the committee if you have any questions. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is probably go to Jason. How long does a property have to be empty before it's considered vacant?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, under the bill, there is no time period for vacancy to be considered vacant. As long as one or more of the units of the property are unoccupied, then it is considered vacant.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably a question for the reviser as well, or maybe a proponent. Are there currently municipalities who are taxing and putting fees or other charges on vacant property that haven't been declared to be a nuisance? If a proponent or...
Okay, Ed, could we defer to you?
Kansas City, I know, Wichita, and I believe Topeka have ordinances that say if a property is vacant for more than 60 days, they have to get the register it and license it. So that's my understanding of it. I know the unified government is that way, so.
Thank you. And if I could ask one more question. Private property rights are important and obviously something I advocate for. If we have a proponent, a couple of you mentioned that this would protect private property rights. If you could expand on that just a little bit, the use of your property, whether you want to not occupy it for more than 60 days or more, and that should be the private property owner's decision.
Right. If we're going to have property rights in America, then we have to have property rights. What we do with it, as long as it's legal, should be of no concern to the city. As long as the grass is being cut, as long as the taxes are being paid, as long as the paint is peeling from the house, what's going on the inside of the house should be of no interest. I mean, we don't, some of them cite safety concerns of a vacant house because of vandals or whatever. I know as a realtor, I've been in houses where it's so crowded, it's a hoarder's house. That's a safety issue, but we don't make people register those. So private property rights are tantamount in this country, and to have the city say that we have to register them with them just because it's vacant doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Senator Thompson.
Yeah, just, and maybe it's for Jason again, or reviser again. Is there, some delineation, and maybe the chair knows this better than I do, between vacant and abandoned? Is there a specific definition? Because it's not in here, and maybe in the abandonment statute. Because there would be a fine line between how long it sits vacant and how long it's considered abandoned, or how long it takes before it's considered abandoned. I don't know.
I thought somebody said Wichita or somebody had, 60 days, certain amount of time period, but.
Yeah, Madam Chair, there's nuisance abatement statutes where a property has to meet those conditions for a municipality to take action under that. But I believe in terms of just a vacant property, as the gentleman pointed out, there's a 60-day time period under some regulations. I'm not sure what other regulations set as their time period for when it becomes vacant and subject to registration, licensure, another regulation by the city, but we can certainly look into it.
All of that is dependent on the county or the city to decide whether you're going to be or have a registry to start with.
That's correct.
And defining the 60 days. So it's all at that local level.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a follow-up, Senator Thompson?
I don't know if that answered my question or not, but I guess my concern was the definition between vacant and abandoned, and whether or not there's any kind of consideration there for the city, or if that's even germane to what we're discussing of the bill. But I would think the question kind of came up, in my mind at least, when Jason's saying, well, it could be vacant for 2 years, but not be abandoned. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not.
Madam Chair, I think the use of the term abandoned, as you're proposing it, would be that it's abandoned to the point where it's become a nuisance in the community, and the municipality could take action under their nuisance abatement statutes to abate that nuisance. This is simply vacant property that is unoccupied and is unrelated to whether or not it's a nuisance under those statutes.
Okay.
If you're worried about nuisance, you can expand the bill we passed last year if you voted for it. Because I believe you're from an urban area.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Madam
I've
Chair.
got Francisco next, Haley, and then we'll get back to Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to note that there may be other reasons that there's a concern about property that's been abandoned, other than nuisance, if there is no entity to, for the fire department to access. If the owner of the house has simply walked away or died, so I see it not just related to the nuisance. My question would be, for the Bankers Association or the Credit Union Association, maybe even the Housing Association, would you be more comfortable if there were a 12-month or a 24-month period before property could be declared vacant? Or if for property to have to be registered, is there some kind of timeline? I understand the 60-day process in terms of mortgages or foreclosures.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I just kind of chatted with Stephanie back there, and I think maybe a foreclosure carve-out would be something we would be more comfortable with because, like we said, that process can go from 1 year to 2 years, so just kind of depends on the situation. And then so maybe something more specific to foreclosures. And then actually, while I'm up here, if you don't mind, when I was testifying, I forgot to mention that I did have an amendment attached to mine, which would just clarify that this would apply to lien holders and mortgagees. It would, in section C, where it lists who can adopt the ordinances or cannot adopt the ordinances, where it lists owner, operator, or manager, I would include lien holder or mortgagee. And that's attached to my testimony, just something for you guys to look at should you consider working the bill.
Okay, I've got others, but wait, I want a follow-up question on
No problem.
that. How you can't take care of the property.
Yes.
So it goes, you own the loan.
So we have an interest in it, and we have the lien, which is not the title. So we're not really the full owners until the sheriff's sale has gone through and the redemption period is over and we have the deed.
What do they call it? If you went on the property and mow, are you trespassing?
I would think so. I could look into that for you if you'd like.
You can, or Jason, I'd like to know that. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, I got you. Senator Haley. Okay, all right. Thank you. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a very specific question about the definition of vacant. What about snowbirds? If it's a 60-day, there are people who are snowbirds. And for example, I co-own a home here in Topeka. We occupy it during session. We might come up once a week for an interim. What is the definition of vacant?
I think you have your gas on and your utilities still on possibly, but I'm wondering if that won't come out when we hear the opponents. If that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Unless there's somebody that really wants to answer that right now. Okay, we'll wait till we hear the opponents. Sarah Fascado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Jason, my question is on those same lines. But my question is pertaining to unoccupied. So, if a person, an elderly person, let's say, is ill and in rehab or something of that nature, so they still own it and they're paying the taxes, but it's unoccupied, kind of to Ed's point. So can you clarify for me, sorry I'm late, Madam Chair, so we're talking about a nuisance or unoccupied for a certain amount of time? And the taxes are being paid, though.
Madam Chair, Senator, the bill refers to vacant or unoccupied property. And so the property hasn't been abandoned, so to speak, where there are no property taxes being paid on it and nobody's taking interest, but the property simply is unoccupied. One or more units in, say, an apartment complex is unoccupied. And for these purposes, I don't know if your scenario would would constitute non-occupancy if somebody was simply residing in a rehabilitation center for a period of time with the intent to return, and their property and possessions were still being kept in, that unit. I don't know that that would be considered unoccupied at that point.
All right, thank you. At this time, we're going to turn our attention to the oral opponents, and we have Amanda Stanley from the City of Topeka, City Attorney. Welcome to the committee, Amanda. Welcome back to the committee in a different role.
It is very nice to be here today, and all of your questions, I hopefully am going to answer them in my testimony, but if not, feel free to grill me afterwards. Thank you so much for allowing me to provide opposition testimony today. Neglected and chronically vacant buildings are a major cause and source of blight in both residential and commercial neighborhoods, especially when the owner of the building fails to actively maintain these properties and manage them to ensure they do not become a liability. They disincentivize economic development. They adversely affect property values. These properties cost our communities more in the provision of public services, such as fire protection, code enforcement, animal protection, police protection. In the last 20 years, the City of Topeka has had 770 fires in vacant buildings, causing $9.4 million in damages. And that doesn't include the cost of then tearing them down and demolishing them after they've burnt. And just in June of 2021, the city has had 46 fires in vacant buildings. Almost all of those fires were in buildings that were unsecured locations. This is a true public health crisis, public safety crisis in our community, and our city needs every tool available as we continue to try to combat this for true public safety reasons. Communities across our country began adopting registration programs in an effort to combat this type of blight. These programs offer an increased opportunity for scrutiny of these properties. They provide up-to-date contact information so that when our fire department does need to respond, they know who to call. And they also provide incentives to help move vacant properties that are distressed into productive uses in our society. The City of Topeka first began looking at our registry in May of 2018. Our staff investigated multiple programs across the country to try to find the right fit for our local community. We engaged multiple groups, our neighborhood associations, our Citizen Advisory Committee, our Shawnee County Landlord Association, even the attendees of the first Expo Center event for landlords, which was held in October of that year. We provided anonymous citizen surveys to our residents to see what they felt about this kind of registry, and overwhelmingly we heard back that 86% of them thought that this was a needed tool in our community, and 62.5% of them knew that they had a neglected building near their home or their building. Our police department and our fire department reached out saying, hey, when we respond to calls, we need to know if this property is vacant. We need to know who we're looking for. We need to know that the details of a property that will help make it where we do come home at the end of the call. And I think we all want our firefighters to know what they're walking into. Our police officers need to know what they're walking into. The proposed ordinance went before our governing body 3 separate times, allowing ample opportunity for our citizens to come in. All of these questions that you guys are asking about, what about snowbirds? What about utilities? Our governing body debated those. You can go read it in the minutes. It was active conversations about how do we find that right balance that works for Topeka, not the right balance for Wichita or Kansas City or Goodland, but Topeka. So 3 different times amendments were introduced, citizens came, thoughts were discussed. Our ordinance has ample protections put into it. For example, a property is not considered vacant until it has been more than 6 months, not 60 days. So in Topeka, it's 6 months before it would have to be registered. And our definition of vacancy includes multiple factors, such as utilities are shut off. I think there are numerous studies that show that once utilities are shut off and a property is vacant, it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that you start to have real damages. Not only do utilities have to be shut off, we look at things like, is that swimming pool becoming a true safety hazard as the kids in the neighborhood know there's no one there? And is it stagnant? Is it unsanitary? Is there trash being built up? It's not simply, is there no one there? We look at real factors to make sure that only truly vacant properties that are a public safety hazard in our community are required to be registered. If you're renovating the property, it's not considered vacant. If you're doing any kind of work on the property, it's not considered vacant. So truly, our ordinance has a lot of protections built into it, and that's because it was crafted at the local level, listening to our citizens to find that right balance for our community. Our ordinance was ultimately passed in the end of 2019, so after a year and a half of work and community dialogue. Then we had a pandemic hit and all of the other fun things that happened to slow everything down. But ultimately, it began initially being instituted in March of 2021. The program is in its very initial stages, but we've already seen benefits. By gaining elusive contact information from owners, we've been able to work with them to help figure out how, as a city, can we help you get your property back into a productive use. We've seen rentals go back on the market, which has helped with housing issues. So it has truly already began to show benefits, and we are very excited to see what could come out of this as it fully is implemented. However, that will never happen if 510 becomes law. Our program will simply go away. It seems like if you're worried about fees, that there are easier ways to deal with that. You can come convince 10 people that it should have a lower fee rather than 125 plus 40. So there are lots of ways at the local level to address the concerns that you've heard about fees and registrations, but we would urge you to leave those decisions to the local officials that know their communities best. And so with that, I would urge that you not pass 510 to the full Senate. I'm happy to stand for questions whenever appropriate.
Thank you, Amanda. I think we'll get through all the opponents first. John Goodyear, the League of Kansas Municipalities. You're going to have to wait.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good
Oh,
morning.
you want to be on the list.
My name is John Goodyear, and I'm the General Counsel for the League of Kansas Municipalities. Pleasure to come before you to give testimony today, this time in opposition to Senate Bill 510. The League is opposed to Senate Bill 510 for both very general and some specific reasons. Starting with the general one, our statement of municipal policy, our member-created policy, number one, every single year is to protect and preserve home rule. So any bill that would limit that ability to act locally to address local problems, we're going to oppose, and that's Senate Bill 510 would limit our ability to act locally to address that local problem. But looking at this specifically, these registries and the associated fees are ordinances, resolutions that cities, counties, local governments have taken to address specific problems in their communities. It's not just the blight issue or the nuisance issue. There's also economic issues. And of course, starting with the public safety issue, these vacant properties, the longer a property is left vacant, the greater the opportunity is to become a target for property-based crime, for criminal behavior, period, and greater risk for fire. When cities become aware that these properties are vacant, they're able to maybe watch it a little closer, make sure that nothing starts going on that's a little fishy in those properties. But there's also the economic reasons. Deterioration of structures leads to blight that lowers the values of not just that property, but neighboring properties. So we're affecting our neighbors, and it's a hindrance to development. I heard from a city this week that doesn't have an ordinance in place, but they've been urged by commercial property owners to address this in some way, to have a registry that might incentivize owners of other commercial properties to take better care of their property, or maybe to move on from it if it's something that they don't want to keep and not have anything there. So there's various reasons why a city or a county may take these steps. When they enact these ordinances, when they enact these resolutions, they're acting locally to address a local problem. And when I teach home rule to our cities, when I teach trainings on home rule, I always think of a quote from President Roosevelt, and I think it applies here. It's common sense to take a method and try it, and if it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. Here, cities are trying something. In some cities, it's going to work. In some cities, it's not going to work. And if it doesn't work, admit it frankly. Amend the resolution, amend the ordinance, repeal the ordinance, try something else. But if Senate Bill 510 passes, this is going to remove the ability to try this. So the League is opposed to Senate Bill 510 and would ask the committee to not recommend it favorably for passage. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Karen Hiller, the City of Topeka Councilwoman, District 1. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've seen you on transportation more than this, and some of you all know me, some of you don't. I am Karen Hiller. I'm the elected councilwoman for District 1, which is downtown and all the close-in neighborhoods in Topeka, south of the river. I've represented District 1 since 2009 and have spent my entire adult life, over 40 years, we'll just round it off a little bit, in active in housing and neighborhood issues citywide here in Topeka. My professional career was at Housing and Credit Counseling, Inc., and I retired from there after 34 years doing tenant landlord and home buyer opportunities and credit counseling citywide and, in fact, throughout Kansas. I'm also currently the chair of the City of Topeka's Public Health and Safety Committee, which is about to launch a massive initiative called Change Our Culture of Property Maintenance, where we're looking at both how we're doing code enforcement and the policies and procedures, as well as how the correspondingly and equally or more importantly, how the community can pitch in to help take care of our properties, our blocks, our neighborhoods, and our city, to reduce the amount of need for government engagement and involvement in that. So I'm going to make some brief remarks, and would be happy to be a resource going forward on any of those angles. In short, I love Topeka, and I don't want to live anywhere else. I choose to live in central Topeka in an area once described by law enforcement as the box. This was the older neighborhoods where there were issues, usually. Even though we are in Kansas, in Topeka we have big city issues, and we also share the state of Kansas's shrinking population issues. Vacant properties that could be fixed up and reoccupied are part of our lives. I'll depart from my notes a little bit. I mean, people get sick of them and want them torn down, but for the most part, they're properties that could be rehabbed and reoccupied. We respect property rights, as you do, very fundamentally. But we in Topeka, as others do, have foreclosures and abandonments. We simply have more properties than we have households right now. And we had a recent study, and frankly, I've doubted the numbers, but it said we have 6,000 vacant properties in Topeka. That's a lot to manage. Regarding Topeka's vacant property registration ordinance, we're doing a little counterpoint here. I don't like it, and I didn't support it with all that background. The intent was to try and provoke people into wanting to get reoccupied or move their properties. But with the vacancy level that we have, I wasn't sure that was the best strategy to take. Nonetheless, I respect that, and as City Attorney Amanda has reported, it has had some successes. However, that said, I correspondingly cannot support the proposed SB 510 because I look at it with a much broader lens than just a registry like apparently has been discussed. Vacant properties are vulnerable. As such, they create risk for neighbors and public safety personnel, and they are costly and risky for cities, but really any community. I want to paint that broad brush of what we're facing, and you can think of your own communities and where there's just been one, perhaps in a community that's pretty occupied that you're in, or in a bigger city. They are risky and costly for us. The definitions of what SB 510 proposes to prohibit are far too broad, and I don't think there's any way to modify the language to improve that. Saying that municipalities cannot make a list of vacant properties for any reason is frightening, and that's how I read 510. Could it be interpreted that our property maintenance inspectors, our police, our fire, or even city-sanctioned neighborhood groups could not identify a property as vacant and make a list? Could such a broad statement as SB 510 makes create liability on the part of a city for having staff identify properties as vacant or ask people to contribute to making such a list? I don't think we want to do that. Because we do that all the time in code compliance, police and fire reports. We identify properties as vacant. That's important to the report, and it's important as an alert for people in the community so that they know what's going on. SB 510 also seems to say that charging any fee, even a reasonable one, to compensate a city for the extra risk and cost of keeping an eye on vacant properties would not be allowed. Frankly, that's how I explain our ordinance in the community, is that it is that we simply have to be on the alert. There is an extra burden on local government, and so having a little money in the kitty, if that's what a city chooses to do to help cover that extra risk and vigilance, is fair. So I urge you not to pass SB 510 out of this committee, and put a little differently, as our city attorney said, if there is any risk in doing the lists, let that risk be ours. Please don't tie our hands. Thank you. Stand for questions now or later.
Thank you, Karen. Is there anyone else that came to speak as an opponent? Seeing none, is there anyone else that's here to speak as a neutral? All right, we'll close the hearing and open up for questions. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions for Ms. Stanley. So I want to thank you very much for your testimony, and I was interested in the reference in the written testimony to the name vacant and foreclosed property registration. So I was wondering if you could tell me if there's any difference that the city of Topeka makes in identifying vacant and foreclosed properties.
We do have different registries for foreclosed versus vacant properties. This bill actually only affects the vacant registry, not the foreclosed one. However, we need different contact info. We need info from banks. We need different information. A foreclosed property, if you don't know who to call, you don't know who to call. So there's different outlines and steps on how it goes. Foreclosed property registry applies to occupied homes as well.
Thank you. So this doesn't necessarily deal with that. And then my second question was, we know that there are some properties that you may not know or be able to contact the owner. How does your registration program identify or deal with those properties where there's not an individual to negotiate with?
So that is what the goal of the vacant is. You identify it as vacant, people know they need to register it, and then you can track the contact info. I was actually talking to my administrative assistant this morning, and she's like, oh, that would have helped with my grandpa's property because her dad was taking care of it. He knew he was taking care of it, but then it burned down when vandals broke in, and she saw on the news the address and said, uh-oh, that's grandpa's property. So the only way we were able to get a hold is because she saw it on the news. Our fire department was calling her grandparents' numbers who were deceased and didn't know that the father was now the one in charge of the property. So by having a vacant registry where people know, then you get the correct contact info. Also, when we see a property is vacant, it's able to identify and do more diligence on our staff's time to dig into who that person is and contact them in advance rather than after a fire actually takes place.
Thank you.
Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the perspective of those who oppose this. This is, to me, it's an obvious bill that we need to enact. This is a matter of code enforcement, with all due respect. What you outlined, and let me get to the question. And I should also add, Madam Chair, we did have written opposition from my hometown Neighborhood Resource Center Director, Greg Talkin, which is in our packet. And I mention that because some of the points that you, respected counsel, Ms. Stanley, and my friend, Councilwoman Hiller and Mr. Goodyear make, inure to code enforcement primarily. So my question is this. When you enforce, what are the means in place that there would be universal enforcement of your Topeka ordinance or anywhere else? My concern, and what we have seen in Kansas City, is they're picking and choosing various houses. I mean, there is no standard. Well, they've said, Ed said there's a standard. Jaskinia said there's 60 days. you're saying it's 6 months. But where does the curtain come down, and is there not some interim consideration of if it's a code issue for universally enforcing and sending a bill for how much do you charge for your vacant ordinance, by the way?
$125.
Okay, so you send a notice at 6 months to every empty house, 6,000, I think is what Councilwoman Hiller said. For $125, you bill them at 6 months. How is that triggered, and is that what's done, or is it done by certain neighborhoods?
Currently implementing it citywide, so it's still in the implementation stage. And we have several factors. It's not just if it's unoccupied. Is it unoccupied? Are utilities turned off? Is there a buildup of trash? It takes a lot of staff time to go out and help identify those. We have an appeals process, so if you get a notice and you appeal back and say, oh, that's not me, I'm selling my house, that's also another reason why you wouldn't be on the registry if you're trying to actively sell your house. So we have a lot of safeguards built in before that $125 would ever kick in to give you lots of ample time for appeal. But no, ours is a citywide program. It's not a specific targeting of anyone.
Well, I don't think that you probably hit everyone that would apply. Again, it's a code enforcement issue. Finally, Madam Chair, and just to full disclosure, I have gotten vacant properties to fix them up. Mr. Hawkins' testimony says it's $200, I guess, in Kansas City, and it's unlikely that if somebody wasn't paid $200, if that's too burdensome, they're not going to spend $30,000 required to renovate a property. There are many properties that don't take $30,000 to renovate. Full disclosure, I know. Our average is about $8,000 or so for ours. $200 can be burdensome. So I'll close by sharing Hiller's statement she spoke to, and she's here to speak for herself. Left one sentence out, and I agree. She says that she didn't support the ordinance, but, quote, I'm not convinced such ordinances, and I'll say taxes, are the best way to inspire owners to improve or reoccupy their properties, close quote. I thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the problems that we have with abandoned houses is it lowers the property value of your neighbors. Is that correct?
It does.
We just heard a bill, Senate Bill 316, about group homes, that we were concerned that lowered the values of people's house. So when we're considering this bill, I hope people consider 316 when they're considering this bill. Thank you.
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for John Goodyear. John, do you have a list of cities who have these lists?
Madam Chair, John Goodyear, General Counsel, League of Kansas Municipalities. I do not. I could try to put something together, but with 625 cities, 550-ish members, it's hard to get that together in a quick amount of time.
I would be curious because we have urban, rural, where I come from, very rural, something I've never heard of. I also would be curious about the cost of each of these lists because we've heard different costs between different cities and what's a reasonable fee and what's not. And I would be really interested in knowing what the league has on this, and perhaps have you all discussed having a, since these lists exist, that there is a template that local governments could use as an example?
We have not put together a sample, and the reason being that communities will adopt these for different reasons, and they want to have different fees. I spoke to one rural city, small city. They didn't have a fee, but they had a registry just so they could keep track of things. So when there's so much variation with things, we typically don't weigh in with a template. This isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing for our communities. But I am happy to try to put together a sampling. I don't think I could put together information on every city.
Looking at Amanda's testimony, this is very logical. Snowbirds, legislatures in that case, utilities are still on. Those are reasonable things that we understand that are not vacant properties or abandoned properties, I should say. So, I mean, those are logical choices here, I think. But it would be nice to know what other cities are doing across the state in this urban versus rural situation. It'd be Very interesting.
Absolutely. I could try to
To
put
know
something
this.
together, and I can get it to the committee assistant.
Thank you, John.
And I would just like to add to that, Senator Fauska's comment about seniors or others who have to go into rehab for 6 weeks. You know, so that's just something I don't know. Hopefully you're sensitive to as well. All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, in interest of your time and getting to your next committee, we are adjourned.